Thanks, Diane. And I'm going to go till 5, and you will cut me off, Sonny. I want to get to questions. I also want to cover, I do want to get to 111D since that is our topic, but getting there, I want to cover some other issues as well, and kind of why we are in the sector. I want to talk about a lot of uncertainties in the sector right now. And if you think 111D is wonkish, I'm going to talk about something called the energy imbalance market, but I'm going to explain it so it won't be wonkish, but it kind of ties into a lot of these issues. First, just a couple words about our company. We started 35 years ago as a geothermal company. We still have 10 geothermal plants down at the Salton Sea. My favorite form of renewable energy, by the way, because it runs 24/7, has a small footprint and relatively little water use. But we own 3 utilities, and I'm going to come back to all 3. One in the Midwest, MidAmerican Energy company. One called Energy in green, which supplies electricity for a big chunk of Nevada, and then one called Pacific Corp, which is branded in blue as Pacific Power. We've got about 40,000 customers in Northern California, but also Oregon, Washington, and then in yellow, Rocky Mountain Power in Idaho, Wyoming, and Utah. You can imagine the regulatory issues of dealing with 3 very red states with 6 Republican senators and 3 very blue states trying to work on coal plants or renewable energy issues. Interestingly, we move about 8 or 9% of all the natural gas in the U.S. through 2 pipelines, one of which brings into the Bakersfield area about 30% of all the natural gas used by California. And then we do have a company in the UK and over in the Philippines. We are a large energy company. We've got about $80 billion of assets. We have, in the last decade, invested about $16 billion just in wind and solar. About half wind, half solar, about half on the regulated side as a utility in Iowa, but also with wind in Oregon, Washington, and Wyoming, and then half on the unregulated side where it's been solar. Just to give you an idea of the magnitude of wind, in the United States, Texas is by far the leader in wind resources with about 12,000 megawatts. By the way, thanks to a governor who in the 1990s, as a businessman recognizing Texas' potential, said, let's develop wind in Texas. His name happened to have been George W. Bush. That's another story. Number 2 in wind has been California, but it's really been neck and neck with Iowa. We have built so much, and by the end of next year, Iowa probably will overtake California as number 2 in wind. We've built 3 large utility-scale solar projects as well here in California. Again, the magnitude is kind of staggering. One called Topaz, east of San Luis Obispo, 9.1 million solar panels on 5,000 acres, as well as 17,000 additional acres of mitigation for the desert kitfox, but those are the environmental rules that one has to follow. And building another, and I think that may be the largest utility scale project in the world, but they seem to be overtaken virtually every month. So we've got a lot of ties to California. We have dams up on the Klamath River that we're in the process or hoping to take out, as well as transmission and the like. We went private in 2000. We were purchased by Berkshire Hathaway. I remember at the time Mr. Buffett came to Washington. It was the first time I met him, and went to a series of meetings at the White House, up on the Capitol. And at virtually every meeting, Mr. Buffett said, he talked about purchasing and our company, which was then called MidAmerican Energy Holdings Company, being part of Berkshire, how pleased he was. And he said, you know, electricity should be a good business, not a great business. And I remember thinking, I mean, this is the Oracle of Omaha. This is, what does that mean? And then came the California electricity crisis. And there were some companies like Enron and others who tried to make it a great business. And, you know, maybe electricity is a commodity. It's not up there with oxygen, but it's certainly higher than pork bellies. And if you try to make a killing in the electricity market, we learned either you're going to get really regulated or you're going to go to jail. So there's really a lot of wisdom to that, and that is the way, if you're a monopoly, if you're a utility, if you are customer-based, that is really the way you think, that it should be a good business, but ultimately you are working for your customers and you're trying to provide whatever value the best value that you can for them. What I'd like to do, and again, just let me talk a little bit about wind and the importance of renewables. I said that Iowa may overtake California in wind generation by next year. We announced a project last year, about 1,050 megawatts of additional wind in Iowa. The single largest economic development project in Iowa history. When you think Iowa, you think hogs, you think agriculture, you think ethanol. 1.9 billion, largest economic development project in the history of Iowa. $360 million in additional property taxes that we'll be paying, landowner payments, and on top of that, we went into our regulators, the Iowa Utilities Board, for a rate reduction of $10 million per year for our customers starting in 2017. So let that be one myth of renewable energy. It can be done inexpensively, or certainly on a cost basis parallel to other energy sources. Now, caveat, being part of Berkshire Hathaway, a major taxpayer, we have been able to take advantage of what's called a production tax credit. That is now off the books. It's been on again, off again since 1992. But it really is extraordinary how one can use renewables in this positive way. We actually see renewable energy as a hedge for our customers. I say that because we can pencil out the 30-year cost of a solar farm like the one I mentioned down near San Luis Obispo. We can pencil out with specificity the cost of a wind farm because we know the cost of the fuel. So we've got to figure out construction, operation, and maintenance. You can't do that with a natural gas plant. You can't sign a contract today, a 30-year contract with a natural gas supplier, unless you've got unbelievable hedges. But I'm not aware of any contracts for power plants that go more than 2 or 3 years. Our geothermal power plants, much like wind or solar, we can offer for 20 and 30 years because it is a hedge. Our customers want renewable energy. We have a number of high-tech companies in the little old Midwest, and you know their names as well as I do because they're all Silicon Valley based. Iowa won out in competitions to provide electricity for their data centers in Iowa because by next year, we will be supplying almost 50% of our electricity in Iowa from wind. This is what those customers want. And it's not just those customers. Our rural customers want it as well. Those customers, they all want stable prices, and that's what we can provide the high-tech companies. We also see it as a form of economic development for our rural customers. Our farmers see wind as a secondary stream of income. It's almost another crop for them. We pay leases on these wind farms, and we pay them annually. This gets not the current generation involved, but also the children and the grandchildren. And of course, the obvious point, it's a proven technology that reduces greenhouse gas emissions. So generally, good for customers, good for renewable energy, and good for Iowa or good for other states that engage in renewable energy. Now, that said, there are a lot of challenges facing the industry right now. Environmental standards, I do want to talk about Rule 111D. There are a lot of other environmental rules out there that are changing the landscape. The mercury and air toxic rules, regional haze rules. EPA has promulgated those rules and is in the process of finalizing its rule for greenhouse gas emissions from existing power plants. There's a lot of pressure to change the resource mix in this country. There are rising expectations for reliability. There's a move from centralized central station power plants to distributed generation. You read all the time about rooftop solar and the like. There's a changing relationship between utilities and customers. And on top of that, interestingly enough, there's actually been flat load growth. Historically, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, through the 80s and into the 90s, electricity demand was growing in this country up to 10% a year in the 50s and 60s, maybe 2 or 3% in more recent decades. But from 2007 to last year, nationwide electricity growth, the demand for electricity, has actually been flat. And in certain years, in the worst parts of the recession, actually declining. So lots of uncertainties there. We don't have a price on carbon in this country. There's not a carbon tax or a price as such, but every utility is acting as if there's one. I'm not aware of any utilities that have coal plants on their drawing boards today. There are a lot of challenges, and I'm going to talk about those, in integrating variable renewable resources into the grid. So, you know, there are a lot of challenges going on now. At the same time, there are a lot of opportunities. Energy storage, a potential holy grail for dealing with variable resources like wind and solar, and certainly electric vehicles, a potential area of growth for the industry. Let me just run through fuel sources and what's going on, and then turn to these specific environmental issues. In shorthand, I talk about 4 basic sources of electricity and then a 5th that's a little bit different. But essentially, you can generate electricity from coal, natural gas, nuclear, and renewables. I would add a 5th of energy efficiency as a kind of a negawatt instead of a megawatt. And then under renewables, obviously wind, solar, geothermal, biomass, and the like. All undergoing a lot of changes. Nuclear, carbon-free. And yet right now, you can talk about all the problems of nuclear energy, public concerns, fears. I mean, when you look at 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl and Fukushima, that's certainly a trifecta of bad public relations to complete disasters for the nuclear power industry. It hasn't had that negative effect in this country. Actually, our Nuclear Regulatory Commission under the Obama administration actually has approved new nuclear plants, and we have some coming online. The real challenge facing nuclear today is cost. In the last couple of years, 3 nuclear power plants have announced they're shutting down. They cannot compete in the marketplace today with the extraordinarily low price of natural gas. And fracking shale gas is the single biggest change, by the way, in energy in the last, I would say, 4 decades. That's affecting everything. It's also having an impact on renewables. The storage problem with nuclear fuel is still an issue. And, you know, overall public fears are certainly out there. Coal use has gone down. It used to be as much as 45%, 50% practically. That's down to about 40% today, and it's declining. The Environmental Protection Agency, in another rule under 111, a 111B rule, has said that any new coal plant must have carbon capture and sequestration, or CCS, as part of its technology. Sally, you know this field a lot better than I do, but I would say there are 4 basic parts to this technology. You've got to capture the carbon dioxide at the smokestack. You've got to pipe it. You've got to bury it. And you've got to monitor it. The enhanced oil recovery business has been piping and burying CO2 for years, but capturing at the smokestack and monitoring remain a big challenge, arguably not commercially viable as a technology. Natural gas, everyone seems to love natural gas. Increased, it's now almost 30% of our electricity mix, but not without challenges. The price of natural gas, in terms of dollars per million BTU, just in a short period from 2005 to 2007, ranged from $2 to $14. Imagine going to the gasoline to get a fill-up in your car and paying $2 or $14 a gallon in a very short period of time. With fracking, we are promised low natural gas prices forever. I think I went to 2 different conferences in the course of a year, or maybe it was 2 years, where someone said natural gas will never go below $5 in my lifetime, and someone else the next year said it will never go above $5 in my lifetime. Very volatile pricing. It's certainly the low price. It's undermining investments in nuclear. And yes, there are power plants. There are companies that are fuel switching. We're one, fuel switching some from coal to natural gas. But those are also raises a lot of problems. You run a coal plant, you can look out your window and you can see whether you've got a 10, 20, 30, 40-day supply of your fuel. I mean, thank you, Union Pacific or BNSF, but your railroad is delivering that fuel. If you're the manager of a gas plant, you're getting just-in-time delivery, and you're hoping that on an incredibly cold day that there'll be enough for you to generate electricity and for the hospital and for the houses that use natural gas, not to mention the manufacturers. And as we use more natural gas, we need more of that infrastructure, which is a pipeline to get it from point A to point B. We talk about limiting exports of our natural gas in this country. Years ago, we were talking about importing liquefied natural gas or LNG. Now we're talking about exporting it. But there's a genuine debate going on as to whether we should be exporting this natural resource. We don't debate whether we should be exporting John Deere tractors or Boeing jets. I mean, that's great. That's great for the trade balance. It's great for jobs. It's great for our economy. But we are having a debate about whether we should be exporting natural gas. We're having another debate. I don't want to talk about the transportation sector here, but we're also having a debate about whether we should be exporting crude oil. We're exporting products that have already been refined, but that's a debate out there. Methane is a huge problem for natural gas today. It's what, Jim, 25 times more potent than CO2, or even higher, depending. It dissipates more quickly than CO2 in the atmosphere. We don't really have good data yet on methane, but it's out there as an issue. So, you know, natural gas is not necessarily the answer. And of course, renewable energy, there are a lot of barriers there. This tax matter, it's been largely driven by tax, by this production tax credit, which has come and gone in a kind of a boom and bust cycle at least 5 times since 1992. There really, I would say, have been really 3 drivers for renewable energy over the years: tax policy, state renewable portfolio standards like California's, which is now moving up to 50%, and then the indirect driver of EPA rules that is making coal less economic. Generally, from a policy point of view, since that's what I do, I would really say that we don't have energy policy in this country. We have tax policy and we have environmental policy, and to a large extent that has dictated energy policy. But we're really almost too big of a country. I mean, France has an energy policy. In the early 1960s, France said, we don't have the natural resources, we're going nuclear. France has 58 nuclear reactors today, 80% of its energy comes from nuclear. That's an energy policy. In our country, we've got a lot of hydro in the Northwest, we've got natural gas in the Northeast, we've got coal in the Midwest, we've got almost 80 of our 100 nuclear plants east of the Mississippi. We don't have any kind of comprehensive energy policy as such. In terms of new generation, I just saw an interesting statistic. Just in 2014, what was added industry-wide? 59 natural gas plants, 7,500 megawatts. Today, California is using 28,000, I just checked. So that'll give you an idea. That supplies all of California nationwide. 7,500 megawatts of gas, 4,000 megawatts of wind, 3,000 megawatts of solar. That was last year. And 1 coal plant, 100 megawatts. We talk about climate change. I'm based in Washington, D.C., not California, where climate change has sort of joined, I don't know, abortion and gay rights. I mean, it's now a cultural issue. It's not a science issue. It's really become a debate about what the role of government should be, with conservatives kind of addressing climate change as more government, if you will, or undermining free markets, and liberals kind of accusing conservatives of conducting a war on science and kind of fronting for fossil fuels. So that's where we are today. We remain in gridlock on Capitol Hill. Congress will do whatever it does. on energy. And I haven't even talked about the issues of distributed generation, but I want to get on to one interesting aspect of energy and renewable energy and how to handle it. Go back to Iowa. We built out all that wind. Iowa is a pretty small state. How can we be 50% wind, which we will be next year, and we're virtually there today, in a small state of Iowa? Answer: we sell that to a large grid called the Mid-Continent ISO, or MISO. That is a grid. There is one grid operator covering parts of 15 states, from Louisiana up to Minnesota and Montana and the Dakotas, and into Manitoba. That is how, so somewhere, someone, we can use that when we can dispatch it, is the technical term. And there are other so-called ISOs, independent system operators, simply air traffic control for power plants. Think of an ISO as an air traffic controller where different companies, different utilities, there are 1,000 coal plants, there are 100 gas plants, and there is a grid operator that is saying we want low cost here, we need the power here, and balancing, just like this auditorium is balanced, with enough electricity on supply and demand. Other parts of the country have independent system operators, PJM, New England, Texas, of course, as only Texas can be, has got its own, which is another issue. But look at the rest of the map. Not a whole lot going on. Cal ISO, the California Independent System Operator, does operate the grid, certainly for the big three utilities, Pacific Gas and Electric, San Diego Gas and Electric, and Southern California Edison. It doesn't for Los Angeles. That's separate. It doesn't for SMUD, the Sacramento Municipal Utilities District. It doesn't for the Imperial Irrigation District. In fact, in the West, there are 38 separate grids or balancing authorities. It's completely balkanized. And each one of these has to balance supply and demand every second so that the lights stay on. They have to have enough reserves for those 105-degree days, or in the, or the very cold winter day. And this has been a huge challenge, because how do you sell, how can you, it's one thing for one of these operators to have a gas plant and run it when it needs to, but how do you integrate a lot of variable wind and solar into a balkanized patchwork set of balancing authorities or grids like we have in the West? It's a big challenge. Our company, I mentioned Pacific Corp. So here's where we operate. I'm not going to talk about the green yet, I'll get to that, but in the blue and the yellow, those two utilities, we entered into agreement 2 years ago, a little more than 2 years ago, with a California ISO, and we now have entered into what's called an energy imbalance market, where the Cal ISO and what you have here in, I'm bad on colors, I'll call it orange or orange-brown, the Cal ISO and Pacific Corp, we are now selling into each other's markets on an automated 5-minute ahead basis. So we have essentially greatly increased the geographic spread of this independent system operator. The geographic spread is greater, the efficiencies are greater, we're simply optimizing our resources much more effectively. We don't need legislation to do it, we do need regulatory approval, and the California ISO went to the federal regulators, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, to file a tariff, as did our company. But we didn't need to build new power plants, new wind farms, new solar farms. We simply reached this agreement saying this is a much better way to optimize existing resources. If you're a utility, ultimately, you've got 3 goals. You want to sell your electricity to your customers that's affordable, reliable, and sustainable. It's about that simple. You want to keep the lights on. You want to keep the lights on at a low price, and you want to, at least we do, want to move to a more sustainable, a more decarbonized form of electricity. The benefits that we've already seen, by the way, we went live only on November 1. We did modeling for months. We kind of went live October 1, but we waited 30 days with the Cal ISO. And we will be getting, actually this week, the first analysis of the benefits. For a company like ours, it was pretty simple. We saw that by optimizing our resources and being able to bid into California's and vice versa, that we could save money for our customers. So it was kind of a no-brainer. That was point one for a utility, affordable electricity. Sustainable, we can use our resources better. And one thing that doesn't even go into the benefits is there's much greater reliability because we now are looking into each other's systems much more effectively. And even on the sustainability point, there's a term that policy wonks in California follow. It's called the deduct chart. And what that is shorthand for the fact that California utilities are buying more and more solar power. That is wonderful. That's great for renewables, but that's coming online at 9 o'clock in the morning and it's going off at about 5:30 in the afternoon, and that's on sunny days. And years ago, nobody from a utility or a regulator would come in and say, folks, run your pool pumps, run your dishwashers at noon. They'd say, wait till 11 o'clock at night. In California, the message is going to be run your dishwashers and run your pool pumps right in the heat of the day because we're generating all this solar power. At least as of today, about 5,000 megawatts of California's electricity is coming from solar. That's going to go to 10,000. It may go to 15,000 by 2020. I'm mentioning that because if California is generating so much solar energy, some of it may be curtailed. It simply may not be possible to use it. And you think about that. Here you've got a state that's going for renewable energy and not using fossil fuel-powered electricity and not being able to use it. But if you expand the geographic breadth of the grid, you'll have other companies like ours or other utilities that may join this energy imbalance market that will be able to take that overcapacity. And again, we're doing it on this 5-minute ahead basis. So even with wind, with and you engineers know better than I, the advances in the ability to predict where wind is coming from and when, it's really quite revolutionary. Believe it or not, up until this started, the way we would work in our company is we would buy power an hour ahead. Our trader would call somebody in another state, say, I need power from 3 to 4 o'clock. Guy would say, okay, we'll sell it to you. Here's the price. Okay, I'll send you an email and confirm. I mean, that's like what, 1992? That's the way it was working in the West. The East, by the way, these other balancing authorities do have automated 5-minute ahead markets. California hasn't because of this balkanization. So this is a big change. Benefits, reduced costs, I think I've really covered that. A large resource diversity and a big development. The other point to make is that October 1 of this year, the other utility that we own, NV Energy, will be going live and joining this market. And that all goes back to the wind we started in the Midwest, where we realized the benefits of being able to sell all of that electricity into a larger market. I'm stressing this because there are solutions to renewable energy. I always get asked, you've got all this renewable energy and it's all variable. Don't you need backup power? Don't you have to build a gas plant? If you're going to build 200 megawatts of wind, don't you need 200 megawatts of gas when the wind's not blowing? No, you don't. An obvious point, but not obvious to a lot of people. So that's what we're doing on energy imbalance. It is certainly providing more value for customers. I guess in shorthand, since we're out in Stanford and Silicon Valley, I really call it Match.com for electrons. I mean, really, it is matching low-cost resources with bidders, and we think it's going to work very well. There will be a report coming out from the Cal ISO very shortly, but with a lot of renewable energy coming online, you want it. It doesn't always come in the right places. It doesn't always come at the right time, but there really are ways to handle that. And by the way, this is a product of the California Independent System Operator. We've worked things out very well. If this is a disaster and everything I'm telling you doesn't come to fruition, there's no exit fee. We're not members of the Independent System Operator, so independently our company still has to take care of other reliability requirements and the like. And believe me, in the utility field and the electricity field, it's not just cybersecurity problems. Physical security issues are huge. don't even have time to get into those. But again, those remain our responsibility. So there are a lot of risks in making this happen. But the real message here is, California, you are the leader in renewable energy. You are the leader in these forward-looking ideas, but you can't do it alone. As you move, and you know, California's a leader in recycling. Just look at Jerry Brown. But as you move forward and deploy more renewable energy, and you want to go now from 33% to 50%, it can be done, but there's really a need to look at regional solutions. And I don't mean to imply that that's easy, because politicians like to cut ribbons. You want the jobs in California. You want that renewable energy in California. You don't necessarily want to be buying wind from some other utility in Oregon. I think as you get to 50%, you will get there. Let me turn to 111D. I do have a little bit of time before we go to questions. President Obama tried to get the Waxman Markey bill through Congress that would have essentially imposed a climate change carbon regimen on the United States. It passed the House of Representatives by a couple of votes. It failed in the Senate. We went to the barricades to oppose Waxman Markey. We said, you want to cap carbon emissions? Tell us what the cap is. Tell us what the date is. We'll get there. But we don't need Lehman Brothers, of blessed memory, or Goldman Sachs to be helping us with allowances or the like to get there. We fought against Waxman Markey, and it was defeated. We now have the 111D proposal that seeks to limit greenhouse gas emissions on existing power plants. As a company, we've got power plants in 15 separate states, and generally we think this is a manageable rule. We think we can get there. This is a rate-based rule. In other words, this aims, and all different 50 states, and by the way, it is a rule, it's not aimed at utilities. It is aimed at all 50 states. And all 50 states are given separate reduction targets based on what EPA thought and thinks each state can accomplish. This is a rate reduction. In other words, pounds per megawatt hour. So, for example, Washington State needs to cut by 71% and needs to get down to 215 pounds of carbon dioxide per megawatt hour. Contrast that with Kentucky. Kentucky is 8 times greater already, and all they're being asked to do is get down to 1,700 pounds per megawatt hour, because they just can't move to renewables. They're so entirely coal-based. And Kentucky's only making an 18% cut. But it's a percentage cut. It is a rate cut. That is, for a lot of utilities, better than an actual cap, because by definition, it is a percentage cut. That allows, if Iowa has to cut by 19%, if we can get under that 19% level and we can maintain whatever that number is in pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour, we can grow as a utility if there is more economic growth in the United States, as long as we keep the rate at a certain level. Governor Ritter went through those different building blocks. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. We are talking about a 645-page rule that is very controversial. There will certainly be litigation over the best systems of emission reductions to get from here to there. There will be a lot of transmission needed, we think. And I guess really I want to stress, and there are these different building blocks. Some relate to improving the heat rate efficiency of coal plants. A second building block is to use more natural gas. If you ask me, 111D in shorthand is a natural gas rule. I mean, it's really calling for up to 70% utilization of gas plants. We have a gas plant in Iowa. We haven't been using it very much. We will now under 111D, as we will be closing some coal plants. By the way, implementing this rule, aiming to get to 30% reductions below 2005 levels, the industry as a whole is already halfway there if you look at from 2005 to 2015. So it's another 15%. That's a lot to do. but it really is manageable. We think that it can be done. Now, the natural gas will be used a lot more. Closing down coal plants, it's going to happen. But do you know what the average age of a coal plant is in the United States today? 42 years. That's kind of good news if you're the EPA, because that means that utilities have pretty much depreciated, amortized the cost of these plants. So it won't be that expensive for customers. It's you all who's paying for this. Utility earns a rate of return. We build a new power plant, that's great, because we're going to invest that money, whether it's $500 million or $1 billion, and we'll get a rate of return. So one could argue, why would you fight the Waxman Markey rule? I mean, if you're going to shut down all these coal plants and build a lot of renewable energy, isn't that what you guys do? Well, you do, but again, it's your customers you have to think about, and you have to think about that impact on your customers. That third building block is more renewable energy, non-carbon resources, and a fourth building block involves energy efficiency improvements. Don't have time to go into the four, but I want to talk about one area. There's a lot of talk about regional agreements. Different states have different targets. It's going to be easier for some states like California to meet the goals of 111D because California has done so much already with renewable energy and energy efficiency. It's going to be a lot harder for other states. Arizona is a perfect example that has a lot of natural gas capacity, so it's going to have to ramp up a lot of natural gas, but it sells a lot of that already to California. And then you have to worry about the infrastructure. How are you going to get the natural gas to the power plant? So there's talk of, well, let's get some regional agreements going here. And let's have, maybe in the Midwest, maybe Iowa with all its wind would reach an agreement with Missouri and Nebraska and Illinois and try to have a regional solution to these greenhouse gas emission reductions. Or maybe California, which began a Western Climate Initiative, will do more, or will emulate what's called RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative on the East Coast that actually is in place and working today. There are big problems with that regional solution. It's a great idea. The single biggest problem is you're playing against the clock. The final rule comes out in 2016. It comes out this summer, 2015. States have to present plans by 2016 and begin a first year of interim targets by 2020. Reaching the RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative on the East Coast, took about 6 years to develop. There's just not a lot of time to do this. There are political problems. Chris Christie pulled New Jersey out of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. New Mexico pulled out of the Western Climate Change or Western Climate Initiative. You've got political problems. You've got the parochial factor. I alluded to that earlier. But if you're the governor of a state, you want to go to the ribbon cutting in your state. You're not necessarily going to want to see buy a whole lot of wind from Wyoming or wind from British Columbia or wherever. You'd like to see those renewable energy plants in your state. And then you've also got to look at the relative position of different states. If you're Iowa and you've got all that wind, why do you want to help another neighboring state that may have a more difficult time complying with the rule? Now, I could flip that and I could say, I'll give you the answer. If you can set up some regional agreement and you can sell credits with all your extra compliance, well, then maybe it will work. But this is very, very complicated stuff. It's going to take a while to get there. Very controversial. Right now, there's not even clarity in the rule of Diane is a utility in California, and she has contracted with Sally to build a wind farm in Wyoming. So the mover and shaker for this renewable energy is Diane in California. Who gets the credit for that? Is that Wyoming's wind or is that California's wind? Right now, I'll give you a real-world issue. There are renewable energy plants in California that are offering to sell their renewable energy output to other states, neighboring states like Arizona. And those contracts are in limbo until that answer is decided. Will the utility buying, will that Arizona utility, or will the state of Arizona, since the rule is state-based, will Arizona get that credit for those California renewable, for the output of the California renewable energy? It's unresolved. That will have to get resolved in the rule. That's one of many, many problems. I could, as a company, as I've said, we do think this is manageable. There is an interim goal of 2020. Utilities kind of don't move in these big chunks, making changes that quickly. We're kind of slow. We're a little bit dinosaur-like as a sector. We think we'll get there. This interim goal of 2020 may be very tough to do. That's really around the corner if you're a utility and you're really looking to change your resource mix. Just siting a natural gas pipeline can take years. Just not to mention permitting new power plants. So there are going to be a lot of challenges with 111D. It will certainly be litigated without going into details. There is certainly a colorable argument that this rule applies inside the fence of a power plant, and that requiring an energy efficiency program is simply not legal under that law. And if you're an independent power producer and all you do is build power plants and you're not a utility, how do you run an energy efficiency program? They're run by utilities, so there are going to be some problems there. But those are legal issues that really, that others will worry about, the courts will get into, and we'll see where it goes. On that note, let me stop, and Sally, you want to run Q&A? Sure. That's sort of a waterfront of issues, and I could go on, but I promise to stop.
One of the problems is that you showed me this app.
Oh.
So there's this great app that you can watch what's happening with the California system. Anyway, questions?
You should all download it, by the way. I'll advertise.
What is the name of the app?
It's called ISO Today. It's free, and that's why I knew exactly what the load was in California today. Those close up, you can see a little yellow curve. You can see how much solar power is being generated today. You can see exactly how much electricity is being used. If you care, if you really want to become, if you're not a wonk yet, get ISO Today. It'll turn you into a wonk. But you won't go to Facebook.
All right, so questions, starting with the students. Okay. Yeah, in the back.
Yeah, I agree. It's a great app. For the energy imbalance markets, do they really affect the peak capacity requirements for a particular ISO if any of the participants have this ability to pull out at any time? Don't you still worry that you're going to be left, all of a sudden without that capacity from the other?
I may have misspoken by pulling out. I meant to say, if this whole thing is a disaster, we go to the Cal ISO and say, we're out of here in 6 months. You're not pulling out on a daily basis.
So would an ISO, would they not build more capacity because they're relying on one of these other partners to be able to supply that and then end up being in trouble at some point down the road?
I mentioned the lack of exit fees because that is a selling point. We are the only utility that has done this. None of these others have gone in, and there are different reasons. Some of it is religion. There are municipally owned utilities that do not want to go to Washington, D.C., to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to file a tariff. There are others who have told us this is a slippery slope. You're going to find yourself under the foot of the Cal ISO or under the feds. Or I went to go talk to I would think, very sympathetic senator who shall go unnamed, who is not from California, to talk about this several years ago, a big supporter of renewable energy, and explained it. And he or she, his or her first question was, so what's going to happen with market manipulation, and are we going to have another repeat? There are a lot of folks outside of California in the electricity business who don't want to have anything to do with California. And so there are a lot of different reasons. As a company, we're not planning to pull out. So, and if we do, I think there will be plenty of time to take care of those issues. There are always changes in the market. And if anything, I think if I come back here in a year or two, I think we're going to see more players in this market. Again, it saves money for customers. It helps it helps on reliability, and it's just better for deploying renewable resources. There's almost no reason for not doing it.
Okay, we'll get around to you.
Can you speak a little bit about how the rates are set? So is it a bidding process? How does it work? Because part of the system is totally regulated. What's FERC's role in this? Can you just talk a little bit about
In the energy imbalance market?
Yeah.
Low bid. The system will, on an automatic basis, take the low bid. Why is that good for renewables? What's the fuel cost? So generally, the renewable resource will get that 5-minute ahead bid. Now, sometimes it will be coal or natural gas, and there'll be different factors. And by the way, there still are some glitches in making this work. I mean, it did cost a lot of money to change metering, and we had to kind of integrate with the California ISO. But basically, it is a least cost bid. Does that answer your question?
Did you need an oversight from FERC for those rates?
No, we filed a tariff from FERC. We have a lot of oversight from the California ISO. And by the way, on that question of manipulation, they have a pretty independent oversight that actually does not even go to the ISO. They go to the ISO's Board of Governors, and there have been fines imposed on players in the general market. Not this energy imbalance is new, but the Cal ISO has pretty good. I mean, California learned a lot of lessons from those blackouts in 2000 and from Enron and from the what happened there. So I think the market manipulation problem will not be seen. But yes, it's a low bid.
So I'm going to preempt the students for 1 minute. Can you tell me why it's good for your business? You know, some specific examples. You talked about it was good for the customer, it was good for more renewables, but why is it good for Berkshire Hathaway Energy?
Well, first of all, if you're a monopoly, you have to remember that you're customer driven. So that is point one. Point two, we have a lot of transmission assets, and if we can show better utilization. Look, right now, markets are changing. There are some people who come to tell you today that transmission lines are antiquated and that big power plants, whether they're solar, wind, coal, or natural gas, or nuclear, are antiquated, that we're all going to generate our own power and we're all going to go off the grid. I don't think that's the case, and I think that the better we can show optimization of existing resources, the better we will protect our existing assets and be able to continue with our business model. We build utility scale energy. I mean, we'd love to be, and don't get me wrong, we'd love to do rooftop solar, but there are, right now in California, utilities can't build rooftop solar. But it's really it is to protect, advance our assets, and generally to do better for your customers. We have 6 principles in our company. It begins with customer satisfaction. We've got employee safety, we've got financial strength, we've got regulatory integrity, we've got environmental respect, and we've got operational excellence. But number 1 is customer service. In Iowa, I've talked about all that wind we've built. We did not have a rate increase for 18 years in Iowa, from 1995 till 2013. And we were able to build all that wind. There's some technical reasons why we overbuilt and we sold into the market, but we used those profits to help our customers. So generally, you want to do good things for your customers. You want to have satisfied customers.
Okay, all right. I think we have another student. Yeah. Yes.
You mentioned transmission capacity.
Yes.
When you think about EIMs really expanding geographically, is the transmission capacity in place, or?
There is some, but there's really a need for more. In fact, when we looked at the potential benefits, the first study said there would be benefits to our customers and California ISO customers of somewhere between $29 and $130 million per year. Why such a gap? It depends on how much transmission could be used. This helps use underutilized transmission. If there were more transmission into California from outside, there would be even more incentive and more benefits from energy imbalance. So there is still a need for more transmission, but this, in a sense, Sally, goes to your question of, well, are we going to go that route, or are we just all going to build rooftop solar?
Does it still make sense economically to build out all the transmission?
Yes, absolutely. And we are currently building transmission here in California, and we are bidding on other projects that, again, it is the California ISO that decides what transmission is needed, and they do a cost-benefit analysis on individual projects. They, for example, recently approved a project called Harry Allen to El Dorado. That's actually Nevada into California. But they said this is needed for California, and it will be open for bids. And we hope to bid, and as will other companies.
Okay, yeah, we'll go over there and then we'll come to Jim.
Why do you think we're so well protected against shutdowns? Because when you talk about much that comes for electrons, I can't help but thinking about the Enron traders selling the energy that California needed to other states. So why do you think that won't happen again?
Well, in terms of shutdowns, I will go to my app and I will tell you that today, I will tell you exactly what today's supply and demand is. Today, at this hour, California is using 28,000 megawatts. And available resources, if you can see that orange line, 28,000, and there are 37,000 megawatts available. So reserve capacity, normally you want to have about a 15% reserve margin, and this is about a 25 or 30% reserve margin. California's got a lot of excess capacity, and it's going to, and more will be coming online. There's that factor. That Enron factor, I mean, look, Enron was a rogue company, and the California restructuring, which yes, it did pass unanimously in the legislature, and it was sponsored by Steve Peace, who was previously known as the producer of the Attack of the Killer Tomatoes movie, and was not necessarily an energy expert, but there were a lot of mistakes, and I think California learned. That's a true story. California learned from those. I know that because I have a cousin whose name is also Jonathan Weisgall, who knows Steve Peace. So it's a long story. But I think that those mistakes have been largely solved. Now, there have been problems. In the polar vortex, that very cold winter last summer, California is somewhere around 55 to 65% reliant on natural gas as its electricity source. During that there were days when a lot of natural gas was being sucked east, and on a perfectly mild day in California, you came very close to blackouts or brownouts here. So there's still a lot of challenges, but there are very good people running the system, and I think that you should be okay.
But is there any rule preventing the behavior of traders selling all that excess capacity to other states?
A lot of those Enron folks are either in jail, like Jeff Skilling. The CEO died. Yeah, there were fine. The company no longer exists. Arthur Andersen went out of business because of Enron. I mean, the whole thing was a huge fraud perpetrated on California.
Okay, Jim.
Yes, could you give us some insights to the negotiations that brought you to the energy imbalance market? But in particular, I've got a sharp question. The one that would be most natural for the physical balancing is bringing Bonneville Power Administration into it. What kept them out of it? And the reason, of course, I say that because the large amount of hydro, which is a natural battery, essentially, allows a lot of balancing against the duct chart that's in hydro. Could you give us insights about that negotiation? Was it really the political issues that got in the way, or was there something more economic?
For those who don't know, Bonneville Power Authority is a federal marketing agency, much like the Tennessee Valley Authority. So they're an entity unto themselves. They are, I think, regulated by the Department of Energy, but they will tell you that they're regulated by the Northwest delegation in the U.S. Senate. They run a whole lot of dams in the Northwest, and they sell unbelievably cheap power, and they also, by statute, sell that power to certain municipal agencies and other utilities in the Northwest. I'm giving you all that information because I don't want to answer your question because I'm not Bonneville Power. It would be Bonneville Power. The BPA has cooperated on some of the reliability issues, and that has been actually a big plus. There are still negotiations in the Northwest. We were active members of, I'm forgetting on the acronym, but it was a group of utilities in the Northwest looking at forming an energy imbalance market. They have a new report coming out. We hope they get there, or we hope that maybe some of those Northwest utilities do see the benefits of this energy imbalance market. That will mean a lot of changes, and it will mean a change, at a minimum, it will have to mean a change in governance. Because right now, the California ISO is governed by a board of governors appointed by Jerry Brown, by the governor of California. So if you get enough out-of-state utilities recognizing the benefits here, the name will have to change, the governance will have to change. That could have affected Bonneville, but I really would be on thin ice telling you why another company or another entity did or did not make a decision. They are the 900-pound gorilla in the Northwest, and I'm guessing that they probably do not want to be beholden to others if they don't have to, but that's pure speculation on my part.
This will be the last question.
I was going to ask, I might have asked you that question, but I'll ask you a slightly different question. Do you think that, you know, the energy imbalance market in the West, in the WECC, is very exciting? It's really probably a positive development, particularly if you live where we live. Do you think that there's a potential interaction between kind of regional cooperation, collaboration on 111D compliance, and moves toward more regional power markets in the West? Or is that just like way too far down the path?
It's a timing question. It should happen, and it may evolve. It's this issue of having to have. I mean, each state must submit a plan by 2016, and that's just such a short period of time that it's going to be hard to get from here to there. Now, having said that, I think if there's a lot of progress being made on regional cooperation, I'm not sure that, I mean, energy imbalance will make it easier for individual states to comply. So that may be a driver. And remember what I said earlier, we didn't need legislation. We just sat down with the grid operator here in California. We signed a memorandum of understanding and got it blessed just by the feds, only because the California ISO is regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, but it didn't require a whole lot of legal. I mean, don't get me wrong, we had armies of lawyers and all of that, but it, you know, you didn't have to go to the U.S. Congress, you didn't have to go to the California Senate or Assembly, you didn't have to get a bill passed, so it could well evolve that way. I do think that when the California ISO publishes its first report on what the benefits have been, if there are really major benefits and you're an investor-owned utility in the Northwest, you're going to have to look at or even a municipal utility, you're going to have to say if Pacificorp, if Berkshire Hathaway Energy could find those kinds of savings for their customers and the Cal ISO can also, why don't we?
Okay, well, thank you very, very much.